Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Cast to the Past, the time-traveling podcast where best friends get together to talk about old games in a new light. My name's Josh.
And wait a minute. I can't say "and I'm Tom" because there's someone. Look who's
oh my
who's
god!
here.
Look at this! Oh wow!
You're right.
Who's
you
that?
got to get your grammar right for the lists. Okay.
Exactly.
Comma, I'm Pat, and then you can bring the ands in.
And then I'm Tom. Yeah, but no, we are joined today by Pat Nat. Everybody, he's here. How is it going, buddy?
It is going fantastic. I am very excited to be here. I've obviously been a fan of the show for a very long time now. It's crazy to think how long ago it actually started because I remember when you were making that announcement and stuff, and I was like, you know what, this is a really cool idea of just capturing a point in time. And now I'm very grateful that I get to be a part of it for an episode. So
and what an episode to be a part of, honestly.
Yeah, a big one.
It's almost like one of the biggest games ever made.
It's a lot of pressure, actually.
It's
like I
almost
got a lot of homage to pay.
Yeah,
it's almost like this is a game that was never going to lose our March Madness poll.
No,
and that's right. We are discussing the 2021 March Madness winner. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are talking about The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Pat, Josh, have you heard of it?
Vaguely.
Once or twice.
I think it was a 3DS game, right?
Possibly.
Yeah. I mean, I remember had a lot of good moments of 3D, and then a lot of moments where the 3D hurt my eyes. So that's what I remember most about it. Yeah.
So you mean the entire 3DS library?
Yes, essentially. Yeah. Aside from a few. Yeah.
But yes, today we're talking about the first 3D Zelda game, and this is going to have a little bit of a different structure because we've got a wider group of friendship right now to talk. It's not just Josh and I bouncing ideas. I want to get Pat's entire opinion on this, So the goal of this show, it's in our mission statement, is we look at old games in a new light. We want to take a game from the past and see what its legacy was and how it holds up now. So let's just ask right off the top. Pat, I want to know, when's the first time you played this game? Being that you're a little younger than us, you probably would not have had the initial N64 release and hype of this. So what's your intro to Ocarina of Time?
Well, I didn't play it when it first came out because I was awfully young. Some might say I wasn't born yet. So I was actually born a few months after its release. I don't think I ever actually played it on the N64, but the first time playing it was actually on the Zelda's Collector Edition GameCube disc. And I played the heck out of that back before I had a memory card. So the beginning portions of Ocarina of Time are extremely vivid for me because I remember replaying it over and over again without being able to save. But eventually I got the memory card and the game was too hard for me, so I waited until the 3DS version finally came out. And that's actually my first time playing through the entire game. But in preparation for this show, I was playing back the original. And that's just kind of my experience with it. But even though I didn't fully understand the hype surrounding the game because I wasn't on the internet or anything like that, I did catch a lot of hype from my friends and those around me keep saying like this is like the greatest game of all time. And I can't help but feel that warped my perspective a little bit because I kind of came in thinking, oh, this is the greatest game of all time. And then when I got to portions I didn't like, I was like, okay, I'm the one who's wrong. And then later I had like a resurgence like, well, hang on, I need a refresh look at this whole thing because it's all been skewed by, just growing up thinking like certain things have to be right or wrong. And that's where I am today. So there you go.
And that's a really fascinating, just viewpoint to come at it through. That's really awesome. Josh, what about you? I believe you have a mixed history.
Yeah. So we all know my history with the N64. N64 is one of the worst consoles ever made. We know this. We've stated it numerous times on this podcast. However,
using Wii pretty liberally. That Wii is not entirely true. But go ahead.
We have talked about it. Me hating it. How about that? Is that better for you?
There we go.
My first time playing Ocarina of Time is the same as Pat's. I got this from a retro store back when the game didn't cost a lot of money. I think I got it for like $15, and now that collection goes for an astronomical amount of money. And I played Ocarina of Time on it, and I was like, it's cool. It's fun. Like, it's okay. And then, throughout history, it's really hard to go on the internet or do anything gaming related where people aren't talking about Ocarina of Time. And the fact that it took us, 4 years to finally talk about this game is pretty insane. But yeah, it's so difficult because it has such a history, right? It is technically considered the greatest game of all time, according to Metacritic. It's the highest ranked game of all time, right?
Highest ranked game on Metacritic, yes.
Right next to Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, baby. But
and Metacritic is never wrong. So
no. Look at how many people hate The Last of Us 2. Yeah, it's a terrible game, right?
Piece of trash that I've never
but no, I played it a little bit here and there. I am so sick of playing the intro of this game, the first 3 dungeons. It's so long, so drawn out. And just to let you know, Tom, when you're doing the editing of this, can you make sure that the Zora King is sliding over at the beginning of this episode? And we're going to check back on him at the end of the episode to see if he's still sliding across the screen, because how long it takes for it to do it. But
we'll keep tabs.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll work on that.
Overall, though, it didn't really hit me the same way as other games. I love the 2D style, the top-down Zelda games. 3D is not really my cup of tea. It was a fine game, and I'm excited to talk about my time with it this time to see if it still is the same. But Tom, you are an N64 fanboy. Tell me about your time.
The Nintendo 64 was my first video game console, and this was my first Zelda. So, just like any firsts, you're going to be biased towards it. And for me, this was mind-blowing when I first got my hands on it. In our Games We're Thankful For episode, I've gone into more detail on how I first experienced this game, but I'm not going to tell you that now. You can go listen to that episode so we can get those numbers up. But anyway, got a hold of this game in 1998, 1999, and played just the heck out of it because I was just so enraptured by the scope of it, the adventure, the intrigue, and the challenge of just this world. I really wasn't aware of the hype. I was like adjacent to the hype. I knew that people were talking about it, but I didn't know what it was. And then when I played it, it was just like me coming into it on my own for what it was at the time. And I just truly loved it. I still love this game. I have a lot of good connections in my life through this game, like friendships, like even my fiance. One of the first things we talked about was Ocarina of Time. And I was just like, holy crap, let's girl like Zelda. It's a win-win. So, and we've replayed it together. And I'm not going to say that it's held up flawlessly, but when we talk about Metacritic putting this at all time, for me, the way I have come to accept Metacritic is, and I don't know if this is true, but here's the thing. So Rotten Tomatoes, everyone assumes if a movie has a good Rotten Tomato score, that is a metric of quality of the movie. That's not what Rotten Tomatoes is. Rotten Tomatoes is a recommendation metric because critics' reviews are divided basically into fresh, which means I would recommend you watch this, and rotten, which means I would not recommend you watch this. So if a movie has a high Rotten Tomato score, it means the majority of critics who submitted their reviews say, we recommend you watch this. Now with Metacritic, the way it's so meticulously scored, I don't know if that's still applicable, but that's just in my headcanon how I choose to approach Metacritic. Is like if I see a high Metacritic average, that means okay, a majority of gaming critics would say this is worth playing. And then if I look at the user score, I ignore it because that's usually based on bad faith trash. But
yeah.
So I don't see any issue, even if when we get into the cons that I'm sure some of us will have with the fact that Ocarina of Time is up as high as it is. Do I think better video games than Ocarina of Time have come out since 1998? Of course. But, in terms of a game that like has to represent not just like the legacy of a company, the legacy of a franchise, the legacy of a time period, the late 90s, this is, we usually save this for the end, but this is absolutely something that I would say you need to play just for some kind of historical appreciation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time released on November 23rd, 1998. Some would say one of the greatest years in video game history. That is debatable. It was released on the Nintendo 64, and it was published by, get this, Nintendo. Wow, crazy. I know.
Right you are, Josh. And yes, the Nintendo masterminds that were specifically behind this. It was produced by Big Papa, Shigeru Miyamoto. And this game had 5 directors. I kid you not. Toru Osawa, Yoichi Yamada, Eiji Aonuma, Yoshiaki Koizumi, and Toshio Iwakawa. I know at least 2 of those names are Nintendo superstars. A couple more I discovered in my research for this episode. But it's really interesting. It's like this a 5-person directorial job on this game kind of speaks
Imagine a movie with 5 directors. That'd be
it would be a nightmare.
be
Look,
crazy.
look, we got the Justice League with 2 directors, and look at how that turned out.
Exactly. So, but I think it does speak to how this game was such a first that you needed that many brains on deck to be like how to handle this, how to handle that. And I mean, considering the end result, I don't think it was too chaotic. What I do think is chaotic though is just the early years of this. So I just want to hit you guys with a couple factoids about its early development because I thought a lot of these were hilarious. Not hilarious in like, haha, this is dumb, but just like, holy crap, how did this game turn out the way it did? So this game was originally going to be a straight up remake of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. It was going to be all polygonal 3D, but still with the side-scrolling level design. And that was the choice for a little bit, but when they started concurrently developing this alongside Mario 64, they dropped that. And then the idea changed to this was going to be released exclusively for the Nintendo 64 DD, the disk drive system. And it was going to have a persistent world based off of the internal clock of the DD, like real-time sunlight. If you cut down a sign, it would not respawn. It would stay like down. They wanted the environments to be that interactive. But then the N64 DD bombed and they were like, okay, we are translating this back onto an N64 cartridge and we're pushing the release date back a year. And then they had to face the facts that this game was very big. It ended up, how many megabytes do you think this game took up on an N64 cartridge?
I
Pat,
think
you
I
wanna guess
know
first?
this. I think I know this answer.
Okay, well, each take a swing at it. Pat, how many megabytes do you think this took up?
Shoot, I don't know what's considered big or small back in the N64 days. Oh, geez, I don't know. I'm just gonna say 500.
500 megabytes. Josh, what do you think?
32.
32 is the exact answer. It's all good. 32 megabytes, which was, at that time, the largest Nintendo game that they had ever made. And that size almost crippled the game in a surprising other direction. You guys familiar with the little title called Mario 64? Where it's got a castle hub world and you jump into paintings?
I've heard of it.
I've seen it.
The structure of this game was almost the hub world was Ganon's castle, and you entered realms via paintings.
Oh, like Crash Bandicoot.
You know the boss of the Forest Temple? How it's Phantom Ganon jumping between paintings and everything? That's a remnant of that early design. So we almost got a Zelda game that was almost a clone in execution of Mario 64. Do either of you think this game would have been received well if it was like that in structure?
I mean, I think in some kind of way it already is relatively similar in that structure. I mean, instead of having a hub world, you go to those things manually through like the Hyrule Fields and stuff like that. But the idea of navigating a 3D space through basic platforming and attacking, if they kind of kept that same kind of gameplay from Ocarina of Time and put it, or Ocarina of Time, sorry, childhood mispronunciation just seeps over me. But the gameplay of Ocarina of Time over Mario 64 like format, I think if they were to do that, no, I don't think it'd be as revered as it is today. Just because I think a big reason people like Ocarina of Time is this grand scale legend that they put over, that they introduce, and that hasn't really been introduced in the 3D world yet before then. And I don't feel like when you play something like Mario 64 that's more level based, you don't really get that feeling of a grand scale legend. It's just something that tides you over for small intervals of time, basically.
Interesting. Josh,
Yeah.
what about you?
So I don't think it would have made much of a difference because this is the first time that we've seen something along this line, along this scale, right? So if it wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have known about it. We wouldn't have even had this in our brain that this would have been something that was possible, right? Look at this. What game in the Zelda franchise came out before this? Do you know what it is?
Link's Awakening would be, right?
Link's Awakening, right? So you go from Link's Awakening to this, right? Link's Awakening is still the top down, still small based island, still, that tight world, right? The fact of like, okay, well, we're going to make this 3D. How do we make this 3D? We transition to each of the dungeons or each of the temples through some sort of hub world. That would make sense to it. And that would be a very interesting way to play it. It's almost very similar to the way the Breath of the Wild is right now. You have the hub world, which is Hyrule, and you have all the shrines inside there that you just go to.
Interesting. I would just say that I could see this maybe. Yes, it probably would have been met, as Josh said, with a degree of acclaim for being like, this has never been seen before. But my mind is just in the sense that if the game was once again focused around you're trapped in a castle and you use paintings or some kind of portals to get to the things, I could see reviewers being like, oh, is Nintendo running out of ideas? Is the next, Star Fox game going to be flying in a space castle? I could see them doing something like that. But I'm glad that they didn't end up going with that. The final little bit of I'm glad they ducked this in production was Miyamoto wanted this game to be a first-person perspective game. It was going to be all FPS, I guess you could say. And Miyamoto's logic was the development team could focus more on designing enemies and environments if it was all for the sake of just a first-person focus. But what basically killed this concept is when the time-traveling split between young Link and adult Link was introduced, they realized the importance of having to show Link, physically aging. So they were like, okay, we got to dump this. But all these trials... It would have been the first Skyrim. Yeah, oh my gosh, it could have, yeah. But all these trials and, side tangents birthed the game that we know now. And I just think it's really fascinating to think of what we could have got.
When this game came out, right, this was a very pinnacle moment in gaming. Yes, we had the N64 and we had Mario 64, and I'm not sure if Star Fox came out before or after this.
It did.
It did? It came
before.
But before? Okay. But I think The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, was the game that grew up with the gamers, right? So you think about it. I talked about this on the podcast a long time ago, that the first Legend of Zelda game was the very first game that I ever played. I have vivid memories of that. And I remember playing that first one. Then I remember trying the second one. And I remember loving when I was in my 5-6-year-oldsness, I playing A Link to the Past, right? I remember having a Game Boy, playing Link's Awakening, right? Then I hit that 10, 11, I guess adolescence is what they call it. This is a game that grew up with me. The style of gameplay, it was, I've played everything like this. I want something more. I want something different, right? Now, I didn't get into it a little bit later, but other kids our age grew up through that entire world, the transition of gaming. And that's what this did. This transitioned open world gaming. It transitioned storytelling in gaming more than anything. And the next time that we get something similar to this is when Halo comes out, 3 years later.
It's
the same way. I mean, it really is though. This is your first person, this is your open world version of storytelling, where Halo was your first person version of storytelling. It's two giant generational jumps. And that's the thing. When you grow up into your teenage years, you would jump over to Halo. You would jump over to something more mature because you're getting older and you want to feel more like a badass because you're a teenager. You know what I mean? But it is one of those things, though, that this is a game that grew up with us. They knew what they were doing, and God, was Nintendo smart about it.
Interesting. Now, given that, Pat, I want to ask you a question. So, as you mentioned, you didn't experience this until several years after it had already landed and made its impact.
Right.
So, in a way, I wanted to ask you if, when you started playing this, did you feel it was in any ways maybe dated because you were seeing its DNA in other games of the time? Because I feel like, based on whatever age you possibly got into gaming, since you were born the year this came out, you surely would have seen games that were already, using this as a blueprint for bigger ideas.
Right.
Would you disagree?
Well, it's tough because Ocarina of Time was still the first Zelda game that I played. So, the games that take the most inspiration from it are future Zelda games, and I didn't get around to Majora's Mask or Wind Waker or Twilight Princess until way later. But even, I don't know, it's tough because there's just a handful of not super noteworthy 3D adventure games on the GameCube that I may have touched before it. But Ocarina of Time still kind of holds that place for me of like the first 3D world narrative driven game, the first 3D legend in a way. So I still explored Hyrule Fields and going into Zora's Domain, seeing like water shimmer on the walls and kind of be amazed by that because I hadn't been super exposed into this type of world exploration in other games. You know, I've played things like Mario Party or maybe Kirby Air Ride or something like that, but Ocarina of Time still holds a very foundational purpose for me when it comes to 3D games specifically. But I can definitely say, going back to when I started playing the 3DS version and just kind of seeing some interesting choices, not even just because obviously the 3DS added a lot of quality of life changes, but you know, stuff from the foundational level that felt a little bit strange. It didn't go unnoticed on the replay, basically, of just the way things were structured, the time it would take to do certain things versus other things, and its general way of directing the player sometimes felt a little bit skewed. But you know, that's all stuff I definitely didn't notice on my first dozen playthroughs, at least through the beginning sections when I didn't have a memory card, basically.
Gotcha. I understand that completely. Before I had an N64 memory card, I accidentally rented tons of games that I was like, oops, guess I'm restarting this every time. Well, the reason I kind of I framed it the way I did towards Pat is I want to bring up this quote here. This is from a New York Times interview with Dan Houser, who's a Rockstar Games employee, or maybe was at the time. And he said in 2012, quote, "Anyone who makes 3D games who says they're not borrowing something from Zelda on the Nintendo 64 is lying." And I think it's just indisputable to look at how this altered the entire future of how like 3D gaming existed. The basic stuff in like bigger open worlds, Hyrule Field now looks minuscule. And if I can be honest about like maybe a con about this game, Hyrule Field is pretty empty. Like when you explore it now, it's like, oh, it's big. And I remember that feeling of how big it was when I was a kid, but there's not a lot to do besides like fighting the P-hat helicopters and, you know, chasing down Pose. But just the scope of having a big open world that connected to other areas, you could tell that bled over into games that eventually became things like Grand Theft Auto 3, you know, like 3 years later. Lock-on combat, you know, this was still in an area where 3D movement, because it was now like a standard, a lot of games didn't necessarily know how to handle combat in an action adventure sense. And the Z targeting system of this game turned into a lock-on mechanic that like still exists to this day in games like I'm currently playing a Yakuza title right now for the first time, and one of the first things they teach you is hold RB in to lock onto a specific opponent in a fight. That goes all the way back to Ocarina of Time. And we could probably just sit here all day listening examples of that mechanic found its way into that game, and et cetera, et cetera. Its influence is undeniable, and I just think it's noteworthy in that regard, in that like how many games had their like how many games I would love to know how many games their developers like had the like a light bulb idea from being like, I'm playing Ocarina of Time and I know how to translate this into what I want to do in my game, you know?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, you know, the scope and scale of this game, it was unlike anything that came out at the time. Yeah, it's unlike anything that we even had. Mario was still broken down into levels, right, with Mario 64. Star Fox was still broken down into levels. Like there wasn't anything of like just go, explore, do whatever you want. So the scale of it, like I do give it, you know, I give it a thumbs up for that one. And I do like, it's, you can respect this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
yeah.
If I could add on to that real quick, it's, you know, we were mentioning how Hyrule Field is just really big and empty and vast and stuff. And it takes a long time to get places. And when you first leave the Kokiri Forest and head to the castle, the chances of you making it there while it's still daylight are slim. So you likely get to see that thing go up, the drawbridge go up, and you have to fight the enemies, wait for the sun to go down. And it feels like playing it now, you know, it feels like so much time is passing. But if we're talking about scale and like Josh said, with just respect of it, you know, when I first played it, that's not the kind of stuff I was thinking. I was just thinking, look at how huge this world is. Like, it was just visual stimulus, and being able to travel across it, then later seeing the sun go down and introduce how night and day have effect on the actual gameplay. Like, those were the kind of things I was thinking of when I first played, not necessarily this is taking forever to get to the castle, which is definitely what I feel more when I play now. So just with, paying respect towards the game, like, this, it was probably needlessly big in a lot of areas, but it was still just super whimsical to see how big it actually was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll agree to both of you on that. It's just, because specifically with that example, when I played it for the first time, I can probably tap into my brain and remember, like, wow, this is so big and huge. I can't wait to explore it. But now when I do replay it, I find myself trying to find the fastest ways to get to Hyrule Castle Town before the sun sets, because I'm like, come on, go, 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 go. I don't want to get stuck out here and have to fight skeletons all night. No, 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 no. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Scope feels bigger when you're younger, and I like that you said visual stimuli. That was like actually a really great way to put it. How many games felt fresh when your brain was open enough to new things that it was just like, wow, this is cool,
Yeah, it's like traveling to a place for the first time, and just everywhere you see is a new site, and it's just constantly keeping you occupied, and that's what you're thinking about when you travel. And that's what it feels like when you play Ocarina of Time, is traveling to a place you've never seen before, because we aren't super familiar with those grand 3D worlds and stuff like that.
Well, speaking of the world, I want to put this to you guys one at a time. We'll start with Josh. What is your favorite area of Ocarina of Time? Like, what holds up in your mind is just like the coolest place to interact with, to explore, whether there was like good story lore to it or something? What do you think is like just your favorite place in the game?
My favorite place really was the town, the first town that you go to.
Hyrule Castle Town?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's not like just seeing how lively it was, seeing all the people in there hanging out, being able to go into shops, being able to play games, being able to, go and break pots anywhere. But like the fact that you're able to just go anywhere, and coming out of, playing all the other Zelda games, it's like, oh my God, like I can go into any building. I can do all this stuff. I can talk to all these people. These people actually have history and life, and they are real people in this game almost, right? And like, I love it. And then when the transition happens, when you are an adult and you come out and you see that everything is destroyed, it's like, oh my God. Like, then the scale kind of hits of what this game's going to do. Like, there's almost like, it's like when you come out and you see that the temple's like destroyed and whatnot, and it's like, there's almost like goosebumps that would come up from it, because it's just like, what happened? What did I do? Like, is it me? Is it Ganon? Is who, how did this all get to happen? The fact that the world just changes on a dime it's just awesome to be able to see it in two different lights.
I mean, I will say that when I think of Ocarina of Time, I just immediately see pictures of that town square and just all the different NPCs interacting with each other, the kid who's following the chicken and the couple who's dancing and stuff like that. And it really did feel like a lively town. But honestly, I think as a kid, I was just a little bit more fascinated by the Goron City, because that's the first time you're kind of introduced to like a whole nother species that has their entire own civilization and just operate completely different from the NPCs you've seen beforehand. And that you get that with the Kakiri people too, but seeing actual guys who transport by rolling around and stuff like that, combined with just that incredible music that I remember to this day, or I should say sticks with me to this day. There was just something like, oh, this is a fantasy world. It's still so grounded in its own reality, but it's not my reality. And I think I really felt it when I first got there. But also there was just something achieving about making it that far. You're literally going to a place called Death Mountain. And as a kid who can't read, when you see dialogue boxes, you're not entirely sure how to progress the game. So when you finally do get to that point, which is, still super early in the game, I just kind of felt like the world kind of opened up for me in that game. And, even though it's not like absolutely desolate when you return as an adult, you still see that just change of life. The Gorons just aren't there anymore, except for maybe one or two, and of course the big guy who you can find. But I think just seeing that was like, this is a whole nother, like, this world is way more developed than I originally thought, and it fascinated me. It was my first encounter with Gorons, I should mention too. I hadn't played previous games with Gorons in them at the time, so.
I'm pretty sure Gorons were invented for this game.
Yeah,
Josh.
Okay.
I think, I can't remember.
Yeah, a lot of the races and societies in this were I'm pretty positive like invented for this. I think there were mer people in previous Zeldas, but in here it's a race of fish people called the Zoras. Ganon in previous games was Ganon, the big pig monster, the wizard. This is the first game in which he's presented in human form. And so he has a race of people that he's descended from, the Gerudo.
And the fact that going 3D, though, you can open it up and add more lore to it and add more of a story rather than what you can do. When the first Legend of Zelda game came out, all you had to go off of what was inside of the manual, right? When Zelda 2 came out, like, you had this scroll at the beginning of the game, but like you had to go into the manual to figure it out. Like it's this one though, you have dialogue options. You have not options, but you have dialogue. You have cutscenes. You have cinematics. It was more storytelling in a movie or a show aspect than anything that we've seen before in The Legend of Zelda.
So just for my sake, I would probably say my favorite area of this world to interact with was always the Gerudo Desert. It's very late in the game. It encompasses the final dungeon, but it's such a meaty portion of the adventure because you arrive there as an adult, and the Gerudo Fortress, that was like my intro to like stealth in gaming, because I probably interacted with this before Metal Gear Solid, but just the way you have to sneak through the fortress and not get caught and get really creative with like platforming and action-based combat. Then you do half of the Spirit Temple, because then you have to go back in time and return as young Link to do the other half of the temple. And then even when you're done with the temple, there are the Gerudo training grounds, which is like a bonus dungeon within the game. So I just found that portion of the game to be the most interesting and exciting, not to mention what they do with the storytelling of the Gerudo, how they're an all-female race, but through this kind of like, I guess implied little bit of a magical curse, they birth a male every 100 years, and he's always destined to be evil. And like Ganondorf is the one male born over 100 years and everything. So like they just as inventions of kind of, characters for this game, I found them really interesting, and their world had some of the most unique stuff. But I wanted to get to something that the two of you had been mentioning in terms of talking about direction and progression within this game. Let's talk about Navi. Little fairy companion who, I feel like very quickly after this game became a punching bag. Nowadays the Zelda punching bag is Fi from Skyward Sword, the companion who overloads you with information. But Navi was like seen for a long time as like, there's two fashionable jokes to make about Ocarina of Time in my book. It's people complaining about the water temple and people complaining about how many times Navi goes, hey, listen. I mean, hey, we named our new show after it.
That's true.
Like, yeah. But Pat, how do you feel about Navi?
Honestly, as a kid, I couldn't read, so I didn't like when the dialogue boxes popped up. Replaying it, though, maybe it's just because I've become so subject to other tutorial characters interrupting my time way more than Navi does, but I really didn't struggle with it at all. It never really got to a point where it bothered me, especially because, you could voluntarily summon Navi just by like playing the ocarina. So if there was like tips I needed to know, I remember even playing on the 3DS version, I would every once in a while, dial it up, hello, Navi here, and then Navi tells me like, hey, you got to talk to Saria to get the Saria song or something like that. And in times like that, I actually found it very useful, but I didn't think Navi really interrupted the flow of gameplay very much on my replays. So I don't know, I guess I don't really have a problem with it.
Okay. Josh?
I didn't ever actually had a problem with Navi. There was times where it got annoying, right? And I think we all had those instances where it's like, all right, shut up, stop. Like, I'm trying to do something and you're interrupting me now in the middle of it. I get it, but I will tell you though, the character that was more annoying than Navi was the damn owl.
Kaepora Gaebora, yep.
It was so much more annoying than Navi ever was. It's like, and it tricks you. Son of a bitch, it tricks you every time. It's like, oh, every like, time. Did you get what I was saying? Oh. No? Oh, let me tell you again. Oh, and you can't skip the dialogue again because you have to pay attention to what I'm saying. God damn it.
Right. Yeah, Navi, I'm sure I had a sense of this then, but yeah, of course, what both of you were saying. Navi is majorly optional. there's just a few instances in the game where Navi kind of pops up to give you like set story information, you know, like where it's like, this is where you need to go next, listen to me. But a lot of the times when the hey listen comes up and you see the press up C, you can just not do that. But for some reason people just took to that being like, you know, they were looking for flaws in this game and they were like, this is the problem, it won't shut up.
Yeah, well, and I think Ocarina of Time was very integral to the booming of video game critique online, you know, because it was so revered. It was often had a spotlight on it. And I think that was one of, I don't want to say easiest necessarily, but like one of the more glaring things that you can start pointing towards is something that constantly goes in your face. But honestly, like, you know, when you take a step aside and look at it, like, I actually kind of like the soundbite, you know, it's a classic soundbite for a reason, and it appears and I'm like, yeah, I don't need to talk to you. And then it just goes away. It's like, I don't know. The only times I think it interrupted my gameplay is like inside Jabu Jabu's belly. Every time you go up against like one of those weird electricity pillars or whatnot, Navi's like, hey, hold up, this thing will hurt you. It's like, yeah, I can see that. It's electricity. And that happens like almost every time you run into a different color or something like that. That gets annoying. But you know, I think ultimately because it's kind of easy or relatively is one of the first things you can point towards when criticizing a game that is otherwise very much revered. Naturally, people are going to, you know, maybe dramatize it more than actually necessary.
I want to talk about, though, because we talk about, you know, well, this is what everyone hated. The people picked out these two particular things, right? Oh, the water temple's so difficult, or Navi is so annoying. I will say, Water Temple in the 3DS version, chef's kiss, because they have so many quality of life things. I think people just the team that worked on that, they were like, we know you hate it, we're gonna make it a little bit more enjoyable and easier for you, and they absolutely nailed it.
Sure.
But
sure.
You know,
oh yeah,
I was just gonna say that makes a lot of sense because I never got to the Water Temple in a regular Ocarina of Time playthrough. I only got to that in the 3DS version. I never thought it was as bad. I guess I wasn't aware of how many quality of life changes they actually made for it.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're inside that temple, they fully color coded certain areas, the 3 areas that you would go into, so you didn't get lost when you were inside of it. The boots actually were an equipable item to one of your button presses, so you didn't need to constantly keep going into your inventory, equipping them, using them, unequipping them, so on and so on and so on. It was just a quick button press of on and off. I mean,
it all makes so much sense now.
Yeah, it's so much easier, so much smoother to do, right?
Yeah. If I could speak to the Water Temple real quick, and maybe this will give us a segue into dungeons, but I was waiting to talk about this too. So yeah, without playing the 3DS remake, I know that is the big change, Josh, as you said. When people say they hate the Water Temple, I think that they get hung up on 2 major things that, you know, actually are problems. The first being, yeah, the menu equipment system for Ocarina of Time is a relic of its age, and it's a big problem in the original Water Temple for all the reasons you described. And it's great that 3DS undid that. But another thing that I think people got hung up on with the Water Temple at the time, and I can't fully take credit for like realizing this on my own, but in researching this, I watched Game Maker's Toolkit, which is a fantastic YouTube channel on game design, and they have an entire little mini series dedicated to the dungeon designs of Zelda games. In the Ocarina of Time episode, they talk about how the Water Temple is like a very it's a vertically scaled dungeon, which was kind of unprecedented in the Zelda franchise to a little bit. Like there's Eagle's Tower in Link's Awakening, which has multiple floors, but in this one, it's 3D space with a lot of vertical integration, and that kind of, I guess you could say, blew a lot of gamers' minds at the time. Because if you think about the other dungeons in this game, a lot of them handle a vertical integration too. You have the Great Deku Tree, where it's like straight up and down. Goron's dungeon has levels on its own, but the Water Temple is like one where I think it's like 5 floors, and the fact that you have to manipulate water to get into like sub basements and little crevices that you couldn't get otherwise. So like it's not just going up and down, it's going up and down and controlling so many other things in between that it's the most challenging dungeon in the game. But that's like a specific design choice that I actually admire. I never get like stuck in the Water Temple. It takes me a while to do it, but I don't know. I admire the challenge of it, and I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, if you guys would agree or disagree on anything.
Well, like I said, most of my experience was with the 3DS version. I
Okay, that's
cannot
right, yeah.
imagine not having color-coded tunnels, though. That sounds
Okay.
like a nightmare. Also, yeah, switching to the boots, I wouldn't have even thought about that, of how frustrating that must have been. But, you know, I do agree. I do think it's cool that you can go at the bottom of the temple and look up and see, like, pretty much all the floors, you know, and it adds to that whimsical factor. The fact that it all gets flooded kind of hurts it for me, though, because it's harder to appreciate, like, your full surroundings when you have to put so much concentration just towards swimming, which is not fantastic, and I don't think either of these games, right? So I don't know. Overall, I even when I played the 3DS one, even though I didn't think it was like necessarily a horrible dungeon, it's not one I would immediately think of when I think of my favorite Zelda dungeons or even my favorite Ocarina of Time dungeons. So at least it has Shadow Link. That's what I usually say.
It's a great mini boss. It's a really great
which
mini boss.
which is a great callback to Zelda 2.
There you go. Even more. But because Pat said it, I'm going to ask it. Unless Josh has any more notes about the water temple, I want to ask you to. What are the best dungeons, or if you only have a singular best dungeon in this game? Pat, you want to go first?
Nope. I will, though.
Okay. All right, Josh. I'll take Josh over to you.
Okay.
I really like the Forest Temple, and I think I like the Forest Temple so much because it was like compared to what you were doing originally, you know, inside the tree, in the caverns, in Jabu Jabu's belly, right? Like these were all very small condensed things. This is when like the game unlocked for you. It's like, here it is. It's like, oh my God, this dungeon is huge. Like I'm still going. It's not very linear like all the other ones were. This one, you're traversing up, down. You don't forget, always grab that damn chest at the tree at the beginning of the game, or you're never gonna at the beginning of the dungeon, or you're never gonna unlock any doors. But like, there's so much inside there, and it all is capped off with, I'm gonna say it, probably the best boss fight in the game.
Okay.
Which is
Phantom
the
Ganon?
Phantom Ganon fight when he's in the pictures, and then it comes out to him in there. It's like it's multi-layered fight. Like it's like after I went through all of this crap inside this dungeon, and it's like boom, now you're here, now you're against him, and it's like what? Because then you would think like that's it. You know what I mean? You did the three things. You got to Ganon. You're an adult. You got the sword. Like oh, that's the end of the game, and you realize you're maybe a quarter, maybe 30% of the way through this game.
Yeah.
Like there's a shock value at the end of it though.
Yeah, it's funny how you mentioned how the temple like opens up midway through, because also the temple opens up the game after the end of it, because you do think it's kind of like the end. You're like, hold up, I'm fighting Gendorf already? That's crazy. And then it just opens up again when you realize that was all decoy or whatnot. So it has that level of just constantly expanding. And not to mention the twisty hallway. Who can forget the twisty hallway?
Yeah.
That thing was
That's in
awesome.
my brain to this day. That's one of the coolest gaming moments
It's the
ever.
Inception
Seriously.
hallway, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
the Inception.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that one's really good. For some reason, and I can't exactly pinpoint why, but I have a lot of fond memories of the fire dungeon, and I don't know if that is a horrendous opinion or a popular one. But when I think of dungeons that were classic Zelda dungeons, that's when my mind goes to. And maybe it's because it's the combination of the pathway to it inside the volcanic area. If I were to combine that, because a lot of the memories from that as well. But also, just if we're talking about the boss fights, like I loved the boss fight of the fire dungeon, of the snake coming out of the fire pits and flying around in the air and using your hammer to attack it and stuff like that. It felt like this is an epic dragon fight that I'm happening right now. And, I just feel like it's like a classic. It's just an instant classic Zelda dungeon for me. I also really liked a lot of the puzzles in the moving back and forth spike, floor Roombas, the dangerous Roombas, basically. The puzzles involving that and the moving the blocks and stuff like that. All very basic Zelda puzzles, but it's kind of what fits that idea of a classic Zelda dungeon to me, basically.
Dangerous spike Roombas better be in Hyrule Historia version 2. I just want to say
I would say I can
Miyamoto.
look. I have the first one over. I have all three versions.
They have to reprint them.
The arts and artifacts, the Hyrule Historia, and then whatever the third.
Better
the
start getting some
encyclopedia.
whiteout. Yeah.
Yeah.
Miyamoto, he's gonna hear this and be like, "Oh, that's what I should have called them."
Tom,
So
what's yours?
so Spirit Temple, as I mentioned, is mine because of the way you have to attack it from like both sides of history. I think it's like the best incorporation of the time travel within this game. But there are bits and pieces of the other dungeons that I absolutely love. Josh, to your note on the Forest Temple, I think that probably has the best atmosphere of the game. It has this just like haunting, almost chilling atmosphere, and oh my gosh, the soundtrack of the Forest Temple slaps so hard. It's my fiance Mary's one of her favorite pieces of music ever, just flat ever. I love, Pat, you mentioned in the Fire Temple, I love that you have to free all the Gorons from prison as you go. Like, it's this beautiful connection between, like, when I was a child, I saved you, and now as an adult, I'm saving you again. And as you free each of them from their prison cells, they're like, it's you came back. Like, there's such a, like, a good connection in like, the storytelling there, you know? So those are probably three of, like, the dungeon highlights for me. I would say as an honorable mention, I think Jabba Jabba's belly as a concept is just fantastic. Like, you're going inside of a creature. I mean, the only other video game that comes to mind in terms of that is Gears of War 2. Pat, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's a segment where your squad gets eaten by a giant worm and you have to like fight your way out of the worm. And it's just like, I'm into any video game where a monster eats you and you have to fight your way out of it. I'm just saying, like, I think that's
why you love Kingdom Hearts 1.
Oh yeah, what's the whale? Monstro, the whale from Pinocchio. Yeah. So
Bowser's Inside Story.
The more games I can get, that's all I'm saying. It's high tier there.
Tom Peeler, just eat me. Of course, it wouldn't be a podcast episode without me poo-pooing on some stuff. Right? We gotta listen. We've praised it now for 50 plus minutes. Okay? How can people say that this is the best game ever and that it's close to being a perfect game, right? When you have some of the shittiest cameras in the entire history of the N64, right? Shitty controls at times. Hey, I'm going to go in the first person mode. Oh, sorry, I activated Navi. Oh, well, I need to get into first person mode. Look, I activated Navi again. Like, it's not user friendly half of the time. Like, who am I fighting right now? Am I fighting the enemies on the screen or am I fighting the N64 controller?
Okay. I will concede up front real quick that mapping Navi to the first person button is not great, and you literally triggered flashbacks of moments from throughout my history of like, I didn't mean to do that. I agree with you completely. That's not entirely great. Your question about the combat, like, are you using the Z targeting system? Like,
well, no, I'm just talking about like, the camera though, right? Like, there's times where, I'm targeting and I'm going to hit one of these flaming lizard things, and oh shit, I'm inside the lava. Because the way the camera doesn't pan, or it's stuck against the wall, or there's something blocking it, or it doesn't go the way I want it to go. There's no freedom at points in time with it. And that cameras get criticized so much in games later down the road. I remember when, what was it? Oh God, I think like the Prince of Persia Sands of Time era of games. Like when the GameCube and stuff like that came out, people were like, oh, well, the game's great, but the cameras are terrible. Or this is great, but the camera sucks. Like, oh, the camera controls are terrible, and that's what hurts this game. Well, when you're spending almost 25% of your time in this game fighting with the cameras to line up to do a hook shot perfectly right, or the controller's bouncing all over the place, or the analog stick's not as smooth or as fluent as you'd want it to be, why doesn't this game get knocked for that? Is it because it's the first time it's like, oh, well, we'll give it a pass because it's Nintendo. We'll give it a pass because it's Zelda. Like, no. How dare you? Like, yes, it has been perfected and has been made better in other games, but you can't go on and saying, oh, this game is so perfect. It's the greatest game ever made. But yeah, the camera sucks. Well, yeah, like, this is one of the greatest games ever made, but you're using an N64 controller. Like, I don't know. Points get knocked off of it for this.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Josh. I think where you lose me a little bit is the idea of it having one of the worst cameras on the N64 specifically, because the first thing I think of when I think of N64 is bad cameras. I mean, I struggle to find a game that has a camera that works close to, well, even up to some of the GameCube games. But I definitely agree that, like you mentioned, like the hook shot, trying to line up that hook shot, especially with that inverted first-person controls that you cannot change, can be really, really frustrating and whatnot. But honestly, I think with just regards to navigating the world and attacking enemies, I feel like the Z control honestly gave me enough control to get what I need done, basically. Like, I don't really have many memories of specifically failing to hit people or accidentally jumping into fire when fighting lizards, as long as I was using the Z control. But even then, the Z control is inconsistent. There's some times where it will lock on and just stay locked on for a while. Sometimes it just clicks off immediately. Sometimes you just want to get out of Z control and start cycling through the different enemies. And I feel like that's more where I struggled with certain things. But to put me at a detriment to make me play worse, I feel like it never really got to that extent. So I kind of feel like with utilizing the Z control, I wouldn't put this in the ranks of like the worst cameras when I can think of Donkey Kong 64 or even Mario 64, to be honest. Like, I struggled with Mario 64's camera way more than I did with Ocarina of Time, but that also could be because Ocarina of Time is a relatively grounded to the floor game. It's not necessarily a platformer. And I think because of that, I was able to pretty much get by with Z targeting. But I do agree that it's, when Z targeting didn't work, boy, did that get frustrating.
So one thing I want to add, though, right? Like, we talked about this. None of us played the game recently on the N64. We played it
True.
We played it on consoles that had better controls. I played an upgraded version of it on a 3DS, which has quality of life improvements, which helped it a little bit. But we're not playing it on that N64 controller. But Tom, you want to jump in there?
I'll just say, like, I've played it within the last few years on an N64. Now, I won't disagree that, yes, when you're in first-person mode with the bow or the hookshot or the slingshot, you're not always going to get the aiming reticle to stop on a dime where you want it to go. Sometimes you will be just off, and you'll have to kind of flick the control stick and hope that, like, it corrects enough for where you want it to be. And I remember over the years that being something that was annoying, but, like, I just personally was like, I had the patience enough to finagle it to get what I wanted out of it. Now it's an AI controlled camera for the majority of the game. The real control you get is with the Z targeting system, which you can use to reframe. Like, if you ever find yourself where the camera's wonky, if you just turn Z on, like if you just hit Z real quick, the camera recenters behind Link. So that's something that I have just always been able to use to get the camera where I want it to go. And in terms of, so what Pat was mentioning about the inconsistency of the Z targeting system, I remember a setting where you could change between, like, the Z targeting will only be active if you hold in Z, or once you hit Z, the target stays on the enemy that it initially targets until you hit it again. Like, it's basically lock-on Z targeting versus active Z targeting. And I remember, like, picking the version that was best for me, like, years ago, and just knowing that, like, my method is always I'm holding Z in until the enemy I'm targeting is dead, and then I immediately go for the next one. Like, so depending on how the targeting settings are customizable or preset on the versions that you two played, could have had a detriment to how you feel about the system. Or maybe I just have so much attachment and muscle memory to this game that I can't separate my opinion from it. But I would also agree that I don't think this can be called the worst camera on the N64. I've played a lot of N64 games that had atrocious camera controls, and the fact that they just let the AI guide this one, I think, is to this game's benefit, for the majority, is what I'll say there.
Well, listen, we talked about at the beginning. I don't like the N64. Right.
Sure.
So every camera view is terrible, except for Star Fox 64. Tom, I put Star Fox 64. I ranked it very high.
I'm happy you did. But here, I'll Josh wanted to speak to. We've been praising it for a long time. We've dripped in some cons, but I've got a couple things here that I'm just going to frankly talk about.
Can I add one more thing?
Go ahead, Josh. Yeah.
Fishing sucks. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, that is true. Worst game ever.
Please tell me why please tell me why fishing sucks.
It's
Josh.
just
And
so terrible. It was not fun, and like you had to do it for the quest and the side quest, and I didn't want it. I didn't want to do it. I just wasn't. It was so long and tedious, and
It's because fishing sucks in real life too. That's why it sucks.
there you go. See, there you go.
Well, I guess I'm just not going to change that.
Best
opinion.
fishing was in Animal Crossing: New Horizons. Okay,
Because you don't have to do anything. You could like.
Exactly.
Pokemon's fishing though, that was pretty
This-
legit too.
this-
You just press
yeah.
a button, it does it.
Boom! Exclamation mark.
The setup and challenge of
Released the
fishing in
same
this
year
game
too,
is
Pat.
fine. Is fine.
Yeah.
Is fine. What I will say has aged poorly. Frame rates in this game, in like the original base version of this game, can really chug at
Yeah.
points. I think, if I'm correct, this at its highest in its original form only ran at 20 frames per second.
I think 24.
24? Wow,
Yeah.
okay, that's more
And
than
then
I gave it
I
credit
think
for.
normally it's around like what 11 or 12.
I saw in a video that like it's 15 to 20,
Ugh.
but there are moments where I know it dipped past that. In the fire temple, when you knock the big spike out of the ceiling and kind of plummet down with it, there's just a point where like you just seem like you're falling in slow motion. And like as a kid, I think I remember being like, this is cool, but like as an adult, I'm like, oh wow, the game's really struggling to keep up. And then at the end, after you defeat Ganon and he's destroying the castle, as you and Zelda are running down like the twisting paths, the game really chugs trying to keep up with the fact that it's like it's Zelda being independently moved and animated. It's a castle being actively destroyed around you, and Link trying to have combat. Like, man, the game like really gets pushed to its limits at some points.
Well, to add on to that, I think it also, like, there's times in games where you'll have bad frame rate maybe during non-pre-rendered cutscenes or something like that, and it doesn't affect the gameplay so much. In Ocarina of Time, it very much affects the gameplay. Like, there's constant times where you're fighting people and you have low frame rate, and you're actively missing because the inputs are registering at different times than you want them to. So that definitely is a con. But another thing is just, like we talked about a little bit earlier, but it takes forever to do anything as young Link. And I think it really extends the duration of playing as young Link when it could have been much more short. And I think a lot of people would have maybe enjoyed getting to adult Link a little bit sooner. To play devil's advocate with it, it really does aid that idea of growing up and being able to do more things, and suddenly certain things you appreciate a lot more as adult Link than you would have if you just brushed through the young Link's era super early on, such as riding a horse and whatnot. And that's really when the game starts to have a much nicer pacing, is when you can ride your horse to places and teleport with the ocarina. But I just don't know if the ends kind of justify the means in that front. It is cool that it is a telling of age story where you get to do more things as you grow up. But at the end of the day, every time I replay this game, it takes so long just to get out of the young Link phase. And back in the day when I didn't even have a memory card, there's no chance I was going to get through that without saving. So it's just stuff like that. In general, how long it takes, dialogue's not being able to be skipped most of the time, the owl appearing and accidentally hitting no and stuff. There's just so much of that adds up to a huge portion of your playtime when you play this game. Again, some of it aids something bigger, but it just very rarely justifies the means for me.
Okay. I want to talk to that real quick because Josh mentioned it earlier. You brought it up now. And so I guess I'm just really surprised because I never considered the Child Link act to be a drag, just because for me, getting absorbed in the story of this game, it's such a great setup for what comes later. I mentioned how some of my favorite parts of dungeons are where when you reconnect with characters, like I won't deny that any of the things you just mentioned are kind of long and tedious, especially the owl, but I personally just liked taking my time in the Child Link years, because it's like, okay, these are my friendships with Saria, with Princess Ruto, and like learning about this world and getting absorbed in the lore, because it makes coming back as an adult and seeing the ruined Hyrule that much more impactful. But Josh, now that Pat's just spoken to it, besides anything he might have said, what do you think kind of drags out the opening? Because you mentioned it drags. What do you think makes it take forever? Just interested in that.
You're going through 3 dungeons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you actually get to the main story, really. Like, you start off, you got to get, sticks, so you can go inside the Deku tree, right? It's I think it's just a little bit more long and drawn out because you are a child. You are young Link in this game, for a good portion of it. And when you finally are able to go and get the sword and be transitioned into an adult, it's like, okay, now the game's actually picking up. Now there's a lot more. Now you can get on Epona and you can take off going. Like there's a lot more speed. There's a lot more, like, I mean, I guess because he's young Link, he's got small legs, so it's going to take him a lot longer to run compared to an adult Link. But
so it's features basically. It's okay. I can appreciate that. There are more engaging features as you age up in the game. Yeah.
And it just to kind of bridge together what you guys were saying, it's there are features, and then like the slowing down, the very slow pacing of being young Link is in and of itself is a very purposeful feature. There's a lot of times where they didn't have to slow you down, where they very purposefully did. And I think that's what starts to bother me. I guess my mentality when I play games is I kind of want the pacing of the game, the pacing at which I play and level that I'm engaged should be up to me. I feel like I should have control over how quickly or how slow I do want to play it. It's great that you get lost in the world, and I get lost in the world too when I talk to the different NPCs. But you know, when I go to Hyrule Castle and I'm sent backwards to then go to Death Mountain just because Impa told me to find that the gate's locked, then I have to go all the way back to the Lost Woods and talk to Saria and get the song. When I'm forced to do all that, instead of just having some other ways of redirecting me in the right direction, I feel like I'm being hung on a string, being like, yeah, you know, go get
pointless backtracking.
Yeah, pointless backtracking. And it's things I've criticized, you know, another game that I absolutely love, Metroid Prime. I criticize Metroid Prime for that all the time, is that it sometimes feels like you're on a string, and I would just much rather have control over my pacing, even if there is this bigger plan in mind, because you do start to appreciate things more as an adult, and I definitely don't disvalue that, this whole change of the world. But still, it's just really tough on replaying the game, because, you know, it aids maybe that first time experience, especially that first time in a 3D world experience. But, you know, games are much more than just the first experience. But then again, maybe some could argue that the first experience is more important than the 100 other times you replay it. So I don't know. But it is just something that bothers me, basically.
I do want to take you guys for a ride here, though, for a second, okay?
Go for it.
Pat, you brought up the fact of, you know, the game is growing up with you, right? And like I said, you said about in the game, like you meet all these characters, and, you know, when you're young Link and you have the conversations with them, and you have your old Link and you're in the dungeon, you're talking with them, and things are changing, right? I mentioned earlier that the game grows up with the gamers. Think about what we were just talking about, though. As young Link, like, it seems so long and so tedious and stuff. When we were young, Hyrule Castle felt huge, right? So when you're young Link, it seems forever because you are young Link. When you get older, it seems so much smaller. And it's the same thing. Once we got older, we were like, hey, like, this isn't as big as we remember it being. Like, it's almost like the game's looking at our perspective from when we were kids playing it to when we were kids, to when we're adults playing it now. And that's the thing, though. Like, one of the best things about this game, though, is the ability to see the characters grow, right? From the Carpenter brothers being, you know, just goofballs and being idiots to actually getting their shit together towards the end of the game and actually running a normal business. You know, seeing the Zora Princess turn in to, like, a strong, powerful person. You know what I mean? Like, throughout the game, like, there's so much that you see in this game, and it's like, oh my God, like, you see these characters grow, and it's almost like watching the gamer grow at the same time. It's like, man, like, you can see, like, as a kid, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is funny, this guy, ha ha ha, like, they're goofballs and stuff like that. But then as you grow older, you're like, shit, everyone got their shit together, like,
right,
so did we.
Yeah.
I kind of love that perspective. When you're a kid, young Link is fine because it's like, I'm a kid, this is great, everything's an adventure. And then now that we're adults, it's like, oh, kids, I don't want to be going to be adult Link, because adult Link doesn't get carded at bars, and adult Link can drive. Yeah, I get you. We didn't talk a lot about the story. I don't think we need to. The story in this game is not only well known, but it's just very special. I think even, like, I would say, like, if you take anything out of this episode, if you've never played the game, please go give it a shot, because the story is probably like what will push you through many of perceived flaws of this game, because it is like this epic hero's journey, this unsuspecting child who realizes they have a great destiny, goes on an adventure, makes friends, loses friends, defeats evil. It's universal in its simplicity, but it's also just really well told. Like,
Yeah.
and if I can just say something, this is maybe my hot take for the episode. The big kind of fantasy story benchmark of the 90s, I think a lot of people would probably argue it's Final Fantasy VII. And Final Fantasy VII has a very complex and interesting story that's very grand and epic. But I'm going to say, like, what really works about this game is the fact that its cinematics are all done in-engine, which means you go from gameplay to cutscenes and it has the same consistent look. And they're still very cinematic. They have dynamic angles. I once made an entire video about how badass Ganon's introduction in this game is because it works so well. And it just feels very fluid in its experience, whereas like it was very fanciful at the time to have these games where like you play out these cruddy little polygon adventures, and then they spent $20 million on pre-rendered CGI cinematics that don't look anything like the gameplay. And for me, playing Final Fantasy VII as an adult, which is basically how I played it, nothing is weirder than it's just like little chibi cloud, then all of a sudden it's like, my love Aerith has died, now we look real, and then it's back to like, hello, I'm Triangle Man, like this game does a lot right by keeping its look in engine. And I don't know if that's controversial. If you guys are gonna, what would you say to that?
I think Link has facial expressions in this game and doesn't in Breath of the Wild, right, Tom? So
he doesn't. What's wrong with his face?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, I agree. I think the narrative is what really holds this game together, and it's so easy to take it for granted because it's been around for so long, and it's simplistic enough to understand after just one playthrough. But it really is super effective and well thought out and told very, very well, sometimes at the detriment of the gameplay. But yeah, I think when I talk about the Ocarina of Time, one of the things I usually say is that it's the game that brought this level of emotion to Legend. You don't really feel for any of the characters before in any of the other Zelda games. The closest to A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past, you literally witness like your uncle or your dad or something. I don't remember. He dies in front of you. You care because he's dead, but you're like, I don't know this guy. Didn't really
you
even
just
say
leave him in
anything.
the sewer.
Yeah, just don't bother burying him. No flowers. There's no ceremony. No, it's like, you actually feel for the character Zelda in Ocarina of Time when you see that she saw this happening, and then later you get to feel for Sheik, and then you feel for Sheik and Zelda at the same time. It's like, oh my gosh, the same person. It's just it's something that hadn't been captured. Yeah, right? Yeah, I guess you're right. Spoiling a what is it?
21-year-old game.
Gosh, that's so old now. But yeah, basically it's, it really is, the legend is what makes this game. It's something super special and definitely worth playing for that alone. And honestly, the nice parts of the gameplay is a great perk. And I don't think the not nice parts of the gameplay is any reason to not pick it up, basically. So I don't know if that's too much of a closing statement, but
it's okay. We still got time.
Okay.
But Josh, what would you say to everything that we were just discussing about story, presentation, all that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if we talked about the story of Ocarina of Time, you probably would have turned this podcast off by now, because who hasn't talked about Ocarina of Time's story? It's been covered everywhere. Honestly, you look at any Zelda game made after this, it's all the same story, minus Wind Waker and Skyward Sword. Like, they're practically almost beat for beat. It's get the Triforce, get the 3 pieces beforehand, then get the Master Sword, then get the Triforce pieces, fight Ganon, boom, you're done. Like, it's very, the Zelda story is very cut and paste. But we are here to talk about the retrospective of it, right? There's a lot of great things that come from the story of this. Sometimes the controlling does get in the way of making this excellent game, or perfect game, as some would say. One thing we haven't touched on and we haven't talked about much is that goddamn music. This is, oh my God, the music. I mean, Tom, you talked about the Forest Temple music and stuff like that being some of the best music ever. The music to this game is ungodly. Like, it is just beautiful. Amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
That was the word. That was the word I was waiting for.
it is.
Damn
It
right.
is.
It's beautiful.
No, seriously. I mean, you can't not. You know what I mean? Like, it's everyone who does anything or knows anything about gaming knows at least one of the songs from this game.
I'd argue that the Song of Storms may very well be like the most crossover mainstream songs from this game, because like I will see it in like memes. It's such a simple and like easy to kind of just like even hum melody. But no, this game not only has a beautiful soundtrack, but it's the fact that music is so well incorporated into the game. You know what I mean? Making the most important item in your arsenal aside from the Master Sword an actual musical instrument and centering the game around it. Like, the environments have tunes that slap. I mean, the Lost Woods rendition of Saria's song, Forever in My Brain, the Bolero of Fire, which transports you to the Fire Temple. Easily one of my favorite pieces of video game music ever. Slaps is an understatement. Like, this slaps so hard you break your hand. Yeah, Pat.
No, I think it's interesting that you bring up like the Ocarina songs too, because you don't actually get to hear those in full super often, right? Those are some of the more rare sound bits, but they're also just some of the best. Any of them really, I think, are fantastic. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you really rarely hear those in full, right? It's only a couple of cutscenes, right, where they actually play.
Usually when you get the song first is the first time you really hear it in its entirety.
Right. And then after that, it plays.
It's like a condensed version. Like, if you play it on the Ocarina, it'll kind of play a shortened version of the ending as you're teleporting away. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the idea is that they put that much time and care into just, you know, those things that are relatively smaller pieces in comparison to, you know, Gerudo Valley, which is obviously another classic, or the Lost Woods, as we mentioned. It just shows that they really put so much care into portraying this legend, this world, and this tonality, and that's something Ocarina of Time has down to a T, is the tonality. Just being able to perfectly capture the childhood whimsical with the harsh responsibilities of being an adult, capturing all that through not just the world and characters, but also the music. It's just incredible.
I mean, think about when you become adult Link and you go outside of the temple, and it's just that ominous, just humming music. That's
the lack
just
of music.
Exactly. It's just so just like, oh, like, and that's where the goosebumps come in. It's like, what the hell happened, right? But you know, let's look at the music though. You talk about the Lost Woods. The music's so iconic that it's tied to a character who is used as a staple of the next game.
Skull Kid, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's
the music's so iconic that, like, in Twilight Princess, they didn't even bother coming up with new themes for the Lost Woods or the Temple of Light. They just reused the music from this game because they were like, we can't top it. You know what I mean?
You can't.
And like, it's an easy pop. Like, I remember in Twilight Princess when I walked into the Temple of Light or Temple of Time, I forget what they call it, but it's actually the, you know, and I was like, they did it. They brought it back. You know, like, so yeah. It's one of the best video game soundtracks ever. For a reason. And,
even Breath of the Wild, a game that mostly just uses ambient, like, piano commentary in a way, where it just slightly plays every once in a while to drive a note home. Even then, they still pull from a couple of Ocarina of Times, like when you enter the Goron village, like, all right, let's just give them that little taste. You know, they're back in their
drums,
element, you know.
the kind of tribal, yeah.
Because you just can't completely abandon it. It's so foundational in not just Ocarina of Time, but the Legend of Zelda series as a whole now, and it all derives from there. I mean, obviously there's some tracks from before. But,
I went to the Zelda Orchestra a couple of years ago, and it was, oh my god, it was amazing. It was just. It was, oh my god, because that was right. I went and saw it right when Breath of the Wild came out, so it was like that music was so fresh, you know. And they ended before they did their encore and stuff like that. They ended with that hike up to Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild, where it's pretty much playing the main theme, and it is just playing that new orchestra version of it. And it was just, oh my god, that's the music not very prominent in Breath of the Wild, but when it kicks towards the end there, you're like, this is the adventure. This is an adventure right now. Like, we're gonna mess some shit up.
Yeah. Also, just to quickly mention, opening theme of Ocarina of Time,
that
the
piano
title screen.
Yep.
The title screen is beautiful. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've talked for about an hour and 20-ish minutes here on stream. It comes down to the only question that matters really with our podcast now: do you skip, play, or complete Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Tom?
Okay, I'll go first. I think it's no secret throughout that I would not only heavily argue for play, I would even suggest complete, because I think there's a lot to get out of this game if you go through every inch of it. Because, like, even the side quests, which we didn't get to talk about in a ton of detail, but there are a lot of really good side quests in this game that play off of all of the NPCs that you meet. You know, like, you could do something really simple for somebody that takes you on a huge trading quest towards, like, one of the best weapons in the game. There's these little character-driven quests with the Happy Mask Shop, the Skulltula House, which is just creepy. Like, I think that there's a lot in this game to justify going a little bit further than the story. So I would say that whether you choose to play it or whether you choose to go all the way and complete it, I think you're going to have a very good time. And, like, I can't fathom why anybody
you're at like
would tell
a play plead it.
I play plead. I can't fathom why anybody would tell you to skip Ocarina of Time, but maybe one of you two are going to surprise me with a good reason to skip it. But
Well,
go ahead.
we did talk about the side quests. I said fishing sucks. Okay, so we did talk about
Fishing does suck.
Fishing
does suck.
I'm not going to budge on that, but I mean, it's not the only side quest. It's not the only side quest.
Pat, what do you think? Skip, play, complete.
I honestly, I mean, if there was something between play and complete, I'd probably pick that. But if I had to pick one of them, I'd probably just stick play and not even necessarily humor the idea that you have to complete it, because there are a lot of mind-boggling pacing stuff that is going to really, really affect your playthrough if you try to go for the long haul and collect all the pieces of hearts, all the Skulltula pieces and stuff like that. Like, I think where this game shines most is in the legend. And as long as you can get through that legend and complete that part, I think then you're going to experience the thing that's most important to experience with this game. So I have a hard time suggesting that you worry your pretty little head about completing all the side quests and stuff. You should definitely explore a lot of them. You should definitely try out a lot of what the game has to offer. Make sure you, at the very least, try the bomb chew game and stuff like that, right? But ultimately, I don't stress over getting every piece of heart. I would say don't stress over the gold Skulltula pieces. I think playing through the game and just getting to the end of it, I honestly think that's enough. So play it. That's what I would say. Definitely don't skip it. Do not skip this game.
Oh,
Josh.
Why? Okay, anyway. So this game has history. And what, Tom? What? No, this game has history, and it is, a pivotal moment in time. If you are going to play this game, or you listen to us for a long time here, and you are intrigued with playing this game, play it on the 3DS if you want to dust off your 3DS, to play the
Absolutely.
best version of it, the most quality of life version of it, the version that just looks amazing, looks pretty. It's just the most complete version of the game, and it also has the Master Quest included with it.
The version that has the ocarina on a permanent hotbar slot. That's the version you should play.
Right. But I'm in the middle of skip and play it. And the reason I say skip is because I think of the two, like the Twilight Princess is almost the same game, just better for me. I prefer this style of story in the I prefer this style of story in the Twilight Princess world. I understand the history that this game has. Like I said, if you do want to play it, play the 3DS version, but I think there's better Zelda games out there, better 3D Zelda games out there that'll make you feel better and more complete. I know it was going to hurt you. I know it was going to hurt you. Listen. Okay.
Well, now
if I
I just feel compelled.
Okay, what?
I was say now I just feel compelled. We were kind of slowly making our way through the 3D Marios. Now I kind of be like, once a year we have to like build up to Twilight. Now because like I have to get to I feel like now the 3D Zeldas have to become a project, because it's like Twilight Princess is the same kind of story but better. I want to spend time justifying that, but we don't have time for it right now. But
No, I mean,
okay.
If you think about all the story beats, right? Okay, so the young Link is pretty much playing as the wolf. That's the opening is so long and drawn out, the same way as playing as young Link is so long and drawn out, right? I would need to go back and maybe do a retrospective on that one. But
all right.
I think though that there is a little, people put this on too high of a pedestal, and they don't respect or appreciate the ones that have come out after it, right? I think Wind Waker is a better 3D Zelda game.
I agree.
I do. I agree on that. Yeah,
Right?
I agree.
I think Twilight Princess is a better 3D Zelda game. We don't talk about Skyward Sword here. We don't like. This is coming from someone who loves the top-down Zelda games, though, right?
Okay.
You know, we know my history of the N64. I am not a huge fan of these style games. I'm not a huge fan. Zelda is one of my favorite franchises ever. I actually have the shield tattooed on me, right? Like, I also have Samus up there too. But
I guess I'll just take the fact that you didn't outright skip it as
no.
you know.
Like I said, I think, and that's the thing. Like, I think that the 3DS version is the best way to play this game, right? And then people will say, "Well, that's not the pure version to play it." I don't care if it's the pure version; it's the most enjoyable version of it.
I'm not shooting down the 3DS version.
But I feel like there are better 3D Zelda games out there. I think there's better Zelda games in general. I'm just gonna say, Link to the Past is the best Zelda game, hands down, and I will die on that hill.
There's just a lot to unpack for the end of the episode. But what I will say is I think regardless of better 3D titles out there, I still think you can play through Ocarina of Time and get a lot of substance that you won't normally get to experience with the other games. Even with games like Wind Waker, I like Majora's Mask better. I'm a huge Majora's Mask fan. I still think it's so worth going back and playing Ocarina of Time because I think that first playthrough experience is something you're not going to get through the other games, basically. But, you know.
It's a historical game. Yeah. I can agree on that. Like I think we can all agree on that. It is historical.
Of course. Yes, of course.
It's
legendary.
There you go.
But when we talk about the best game of all time, we talk about, of course, Chrono Trigger being the best game ever made.
I mean, it's up there.
But before we leave, Tom, we got to take it back down to the field to see where the King Zora is. How far is he on his track across the entrance?
I think he has a little bit further to go. He's he's inches away. And so with that time, Pat, I want to thank you, first of all, for coming on the show. We had a blast talking to you. I think this was really great having you on the show.
Yes, much appreciated.
And yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And we got a hot dog and grandstand for Pat because Pat is the YouTube king. I told you I was going to mention it anytime we collaborate. I'm always going to throw that out there. But Pat, across his multiple YouTube channels and his collaboration with his group known as Cake Core, they produce tons of great gaming content. Pat, do you want to distill your recommendations down to the best delivery that you, as your highness, can deliver?
I'm not entirely sure what you just asked of me. I'm not gonna lie.
Shill.
Okay, shill. Yeah, I can shill. Yeah, is very official. I'm retired king of YouTube King, by the way. I upload to several different channels. I guess I interview different creators on my Pat Nat channel, and I cut that up into segments if you guys would like to see me talk about creative processes with them and ask them about their creative journey. But of course, I also do Bracket Breakdown, which is in between seasons right now, but we do have another season coming up later this year, and that's basically a tournament-style debate series. And then, of course, I also have Pat Nat Games, where I talk a little bit more freeform, just about any given gaming topic I want to talk about. And then, of course, there is Cake Core if you have an itch for Let's Plays. What? Let's Plays? What are even those? I don't know, but if you have an itch for them, you can check out Cake Core as well.
Bracket Breakdown is incredibly fun. Your tier lists that you've done on Pat Nat Games are always a delight. I commented, but I just got a kick out of when he was Josh, he did a tier list of all the Gen 8 Pokemon, having not played Sword and Shield. So he's just like describing these things based off of just like, he's like, what is this thing? This kind of looks something interesting. And I'm in the comments like, no, that's not what that is.
Listen,
But,
okay,
like, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I can't believe Steve made it as far as he did.
I can't either. I'm on your side.
Okay,
I'm on your
listen,
side.
I main Captain Falcon, okay?
Yeah,
So that's,
I know.
it's...
Yeah. If you want to see some controversy, you see their bracket breakdown of the best Smash Brothers character and who ended up where. You'll be shocked.
Just watch the whole season, but then just skip the episode with Steve and Mario, and you'll be okay. You'll be scratched a little bit, but you'll still be okay. That's the one that scars, though. That's the one you want to skip. We'll unlist that one, actually. You won't be able to find it. And search for it, it'll be gone.
That's the Josh hot take of the series.
That's not a hot take. That's the correct take. The hot takes were in the episode. I'm as pissed as you are. It's just how it goes. So. I vote. The footage shows I voted correctly. Okay, that's all.
Okay.
I'm on the right side
You're
of
on the
history
right
on this one.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, links to all of said channels and outlets are below. Definitely give them a look.
But speaking of links, this is the end of the talking of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I couldn't figure out a way to do a segue there.
That works
He's
perfectly
a,
fine.
he's,
But
a mute, he's a mute boy. He's a mute boy, so it kind of works.
Yeah. So as we are talking here, King Zora has finally made his way across the platform.
He did it. He crossed the
finally
line.
did it. But guys, if you like this content, make sure to give us a. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, we're not on Twitch. Never mind. You're gonna throw this all. You're gonna throw the ending thing up. I'm so used to doing Twitch, Tom.
We've been
sorry.
streaming for so long.
I know. But until next time, everybody. This has been Josh,
Pat.
And I'm Tom.
and we will all see you in the future. While we boot up the Triflex capacitor, please take some time to subscribe to the show and leave us a review wherever you listen. This show is nothing without you, and any support helps.
If you want to connect with us and discuss the past, present, and future of gaming, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
We also have a Twitch channel where we play games for the show and for fun, so come chat with us anytime.
Thanks again for listening.
And we'll see you in the future.